guys, so today I'm teaching you how to trans the way our TG does. So this series will be divided into two videos. First with an intro about our trans group structure, our timeline, our TG rules, and what is a trans police. And the second part will be all about tips and tricks for normal transing and transing during online classes. But before that, let's get through some disclaimers. First off, I'm not a transing expert. I don't think there is any transing expert, honestly, because it all depends on your batch, depends on your TG, depends on the subject you're transing, and it depends on the module you're transing even. So yeah, this can all apply to you. Some of it can apply to you, none of it can apply to you. And I wasn't asked by anyone to do this. I was just bored and I needed content. And of course, hello 2025. I know this is like your first week in med school. So as someone who went through YL5 with no experience, no knowledge of transing, I'm here to help you. And also number 3, I guess, a lot of the tips that I'm gonna have are gonna be focused on helping your batchmates pass the exam. So of course, we know that is not the goal here. The goal is to learn. So I'm not gonna lie about it, but always remember, a well-formatted trans with no errata, that is gonna be so helpful in understanding the content, but the main focus is always learning it. And the learning part is always up to you. Depends on your study style, study habits. The trans is just here to help you. And lastly, I will be talking about a certain structure in a trans group that may or may not work for you. So this depends on you, your trans group mates. It depends on how many people are in your trans group, and you'll find out about that later when I discuss it. And the structure can work for you, or maybe it only works for our batch, or maybe, I don't know. And if you're not even from ASMPH, welcome, hello, thank you for being here. So yeah, that's all the disclaimers I have. So on to the next thing, which is big thank you to our trans chief, Nikki Lazatin, for helping this all happen. And also a big thanks to our past trans chiefs, Pat and Kevin from California. And also a big thanks to all the Transcom members ever. I mean, seriously, we wouldn't be here without them. And most especially, big thanks to Eric and May, who, without them, there wouldn't be these beautiful styles and formatting that we have right now. And also thank you to our EO Esther and our LO AJ, and also to our ACADS VP Marian and Big ACADS VP Michael Tan. So thank you for the guidance on how to make this video. And lastly, of course, thank you to my trans group, which is the best trans group ever. So on to the first topic, our trans group structure. So here it is. Here's our trans group structure. So as you can see, there's 3 groups. There's 2 subgroups and 1 TP group. The subgroups are made up of 3 people with 1 subgroup trans police. Those subgroups are in charge of dividing the whole trans into 2 parts and transing their own parts. So each subgroup is responsible for their own formatting, all their content, the pictures, the references, any kind of section summary that they have to do. They have to do all of that. And once they're done transing their own half, it goes through a checking by their own subgroup trans police, and then it will be forwarded to our first TP. And she's in charge of consolidating the 2 halves of the transes. She does like a really quick checking of the trans, and she makes the master tables, and she makes sure that the whole trans looks like it was written by 1 person only. And then after that, she sends it to me, and then I do everything all over again. Okay, so now we're moving on to our timeline. Your Transcom will also probably have their own timeline of deadlines, but this is a timeline where I incorporated the Transcom deadlines and also our own internal deadlines. So on the first day, which is day 0, that's the day before the lecture. And that's when the 2 subgroups divide the trans into 2 equal parts. And then they make a pre-trans. So what is a pre-trans? A pre-trans is basically your trans before the lecture. And now you're probably like, what are you talking about? Okay, so some lecturers can have more or less the same lecture every year, and you can copy most of the information and the formatting from last year's trans so that you can get a kind of a head start on transing, and so that you don't have to do everything the night after the lecture. Is it required? No. It's all up to your trans group if you want to do it, and in our case, our TG subgroups. I noticed that sometimes they do it, sometimes they don't do it, and it's really up to you guys. Of course, there's an advantage if you pre-trans the day before. You won't have to rewrite the whole trans in just one night, and that's good because sometimes the trances can be very long. But sometimes the lecturer is different or the lecture is completely different and you didn't anticipate it, and you just have to work with what you got. And then we move on to day 1, which is the lecture day. So what happens then? I don't know. I'm asleep. So yes, I'm the type of TP who asks the lecturer, can I record? And then when they say yeah, I'm just like, okay, record. And you're probably gonna be like, what? You're the TP, you do that? We will get into that later. But yeah, to be honest, I was asleep most of the lectures that we had to trans, and even most of the lectures in general. The left side of Chungte knows that. But for other TGs, they can have different systems. This is the part where you just have to figure out what works for your trans group. So there are different ways to delegate the work. One way is work type. For example, somebody will be the audio recorder, somebody will be taking notes during the lecture. You can even divide that task into like several people taking notes of different parts of the lecture. And there can also be somebody in charge of the photos, and there can be somebody in charge of formatting and checking, etc. You can also divide the work according to sections, like how we do it. So section 1 to 3, for example, is one person. Sections 4 to 6 is also another person or another group. So for each section, they'll do everything. Formatting, transcribing, and adding the pictures and the references. There are probably some ways that I haven't even thought about that other people do. So it's really up to your TG. So after the lecture, the two subgroups finish up their halves, and by 10 or 11 p.m. they send it to our first TP, Nat, and she does her thing. And then she sends it in to me around 1 or 2 a.m. sometimes, and I do everything she did all over again. So now more on to what I do as a TP. I usually listen to the audio while checking the trans. So yes, if it's a 2-hour lecture, I'll be listening to that audio for 2 hours. Also, if the lecture is heavily based from a book, for example, Robbins or Moore, then I make sure to check it with the book as well. Also, I don't rely so much on previous year's trances because sometimes they have unchecked errata, and I've caught that a few times, so I'd rather just listen to the audio or look at the book. Once I'm done doing everything, checking for errata, adding content, adding pictures, I send it in by the deadline, which is 8 or 7 a.m. And then I go to sleep and miss the first lecture of the day. So again, not everybody can have these many steps depending on your TG. You might not have enough people. And the important thing is to communicate with your trans group what those things are. So now we're moving on to day 2, which is the submission day, or the day after the lecture. So early on in YL6, we decided that the day after the lecture, that is when you should submit your final trans. And why is that? It's because YL6 is pretty fast-paced and people have to start studying for the next exam right away. So this is the day when the trans is submitted and also a revision. But again, the rule was the first submission should be final already. So usually after I submit it in the morning, I upload a doc file and my trans group can check that and report any errata to me, any formatting errata or anything, and then I'll just correct it before submitting the revision. Now we move on to day 3 and onwards. So this is usually 2 days after the lecture until the exam. So usually this is when most of the errata come in. Based on my experience, the errata came in around Friday night to Saturday morning because that's when people usually start studying. And the things you need to make sure to be doing around this time as a TP and as a member of your trans group is to keep your messenger open just in case anybody's gonna report an errata. If there's any errata, check it with the source and report it to the errata tracker, and in our case also report it to the Telegram chat. And then lastly, the day after the exam. So after the exam, usually we send in another final version of the trans with absolutely as little errata as possible. So now we're moving on to the next topic, which is what is a trans police? So as defined by our transcom, this is something I just grabbed from our TP chat. 1 represents a trans group to transcom. 2 reviews the group's trans before submission. 3 uploads their submissions to the trans drive. And 4 reports any errata in the transes and inputs in the tracker, and also post on Telegram. So basically, these are the things that are expected of you as a trans police to do. But you can have additional work depending on your trans group. So your agreements with your trans group should be negotiated before even your first transing day. But in most of our meetings of TPs with the transcom, we kind of agreed that TPs shouldn't be doing anything during a lecture because checking in itself is so much work already. So now we're moving on to the last topic of this video, which is our trans group rules. So these rules, I just made them up and my trans group kind of agreed. So we have one general rule before trans, which is communication is key. So if I haven't mentioned it enough times, you need to negotiate some things with your trans group before you even trans. It is very important to having a very good relationship with your trans group. Okay, so moving on to our house rule. Rule number 1, quality over timeliness. So actually this rule was the other way around in YL5 because we used to be very late with our trans. But in YL6, we kind of agreed that it was better to have a great trans in the first try than to have an early trans that was shit. So yeah, in YL6, even though we were late for like an hour or 2 sometimes, it was better because at least our trans would have been the highest quality it could have been in the first try. And actually, it also saves a lot of time in checking after submitting your trans because you don't want to be checking your trans throughout the day and finding out there were actually a lot of things wrong. Rule number 2, no more errata, subgroup trans police. So another issue we had in YL5 was that we had a bunch of errata all the time and we didn't want that anymore. So that's why we added all those steps of checking, just so that we make sure there's as little erratas as possible by the time it gets posted on the batch drive. Rule number 3 is format your own half. So back in YL5, back when I wasn't the trans police yet, I was the formatter. That was my only job, to format. And it was the worst. It was the worst. It was really, really stressful to make everything look right. So when I became trans police, I showed them how to get the template and how to format. And if there were any questions about formatting, they just ask me. Formatting is hard. And if you're a visual learner like me, I like to see very pretty trans. Rule number 4, high definition pictures only. This is kind of obvious, but I just wanted to make it a real rule because nobody wants to see a pixelized photo or a pixelized picture for histology or pharma. Nobody wants that. Number 5, use diagrams, pictures for pathways, or cartoon. So one of the easiest ways to memorize things is to have it in a diagram format, especially for vasculature and lymphatic, which is high yield for YL5. Like, there will always be a question about those things. And mode of actions for YL6. So those things, very high yield. Always put them. If there's no diagram for the vasculature, always make them. It makes it so much easier to memorize. And lastly, always highlight the need to knows. And this will come up in our next video, so please watch that. So that's it for this video. It was just all about the basics. In the next video, I'll talk about how to format, basic how-tos, and some little tricks to make learning easier. So yeah, see you in the next video. And if you liked this video, please click that thumbs up and subscribe and comment. And if you learned anything, please share. Hey guys, if you're still here, I just want to mention that this isn't something that anyone asked me to do. Like, I just wanted to do it. Also because, yeah, I needed some content, but I was actually surprised that these things weren't common practice, especially for the next video, which will highlight all the tricks that I learned throughout the years. Parang daming years. But yeah, feels like I learned so much, especially about how to learn using transes. And also because I didn't become the type of person who would make Anki cards or Quizlets, so I really relied on the trans more than all those other stuff. And you know, guys, it's really hard to make a really good trans that people will appreciate. And knowing that people really liked our trances, it's really, really heartwarming. Like it makes, like it would make my day when somebody would say that reading our trans made it so much easier for them to understand the topics, especially when it was a really hard trans. Shout out Michael for being a hard fucking trans. I also didn't know if I wanted to do a lot of med school related content because fuck. I mean, I already do med school in my normal life, and now I'm also integrating it into kind of an online life on YouTube, and it's just. But you know, this just felt like something I needed to do to help out other people who just were as clueless as me when it came to transing. So yeah, thanks for sticking so long, and I'll see you in the next video.